Tom, it's a very different feeling than in Australia. The US is really having a nightmare at the moment. It's basically it's surging. The virus is surging across a lot of the country in an uneven fashion, but certainly in the main hotspot of New York City and the surrounds there, it's truly awful. I mean, it's they've now lost over 4,000 people in New York State alone. Of course, that's mainly New York City, but not entirely. They're losing 600 a day there. There's a real sense, I think, not just in New York, Tom, but also here in Washington, where I am, around the country, of just disbelief that it's got away from them in this manner.
So when you talk about that disbelief, I mean, there's so many different things going on, as there always are during the Trump presidency, these different narratives. There's talk about the pandemic's team and possible defunding of them, essentially. Social distancing perhaps not taken seriously enough. Even very early on, tests that apparently weren't working. What do you see as the narrative that people see has been the failure of the US so far to do so badly, to be behind on the curve so badly?
It's the answer to that. It's a complicated answer, but it's a twofold answer. Firstly, of course, you have the more obvious fact that the Donald Trump played the issue down early on for several weeks. That led to quite an institutional paralysis, if you like, within the government. That was a very valuable 2 to 3 weeks that they could have used to do other things. But also the blame certainly doesn't lie entirely with Donald Trump. The very institutional failure as well. The main diseases body here failed in getting the original test. They tried to do a test for coronavirus. That failed. That lost them about 4 weeks. There was a lot of institutional paralysis here. Just a general sense of it wasn't that serious as far as they thought, even at the lower levels of government. And so, everything combined to the point that when the government and when Donald Trump finally realised how serious it was, the infections were already here in the US, the people had come in, it was already a fire that really couldn't be put out.
That test is what I think makes people astounded that this could happen in the US. They were essentially thinking they could get a quicker and more effective one themselves. And you mentioned that 4 weeks. I mean, losing 4 weeks with COVID-19 is everything.
That's right. It was absolutely everything. I mean, they didn't want to outsource that test to private companies. A lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape. It's it's quite a murky story, but it's really remarkable that America, I think, a first world country, the world superpower, effectively, could botch this at so many levels. And that's really what it was. No one really blew the siren early enough and quickly enough. And that went all the way through. It went up to Donald Trump, but it also was even in the coronavirus task force, Tom. They were very, very slow to really realise how quick this virus was to spread and also how dangerous it was as well.
It's been striking, the rhetoric of Scott Morrison here in Australia, saying there's no Team Red, no Team Blue, there are no unions, there's just Australians. And look, there's still some partisan outbreaks around the JobKeeper program, for example, but that's the tone he's struck. Donald Trump's had a couple of news conferences where he seemed to think, gee, this is getting serious, but still seems to slip back into blaming people, the fake news media he talks about. Obama gets blamed as well for funding. It just seems incredible. Is that something that's spreading through to Republicans, or is it just still a case right now in the US that there are just two teams and two narratives and no issue can permeate that?
Look, I think Donald Trump's performance is generally criticised over here. It is a bit divided. It's still a bit polarised. Interestingly enough, though, Trump's ratings have gone up to a small degree, despite some obvious missteps early on where he played it down. I think that's not so much the divide as much as Americans traditionally rally around a president, Tom, in this situation. Think of George W. Bush after 9/11, FDR in the Second World War. It's a fairly common thing for them to do. Whether this lasts will be interesting, because certainly Donald Trump downplayed it early on, and it was something that I think the Democrats certainly are arguing, even some Republicans are arguing, has cost the country an awful lot. But will he be viewed in that prism down the track? We don't know. If Donald Trump does a good job from this point of view, from this point on of tackling it, then really, he may well come out and be a favourite for re-election. It's very hard to tell at this point. It's very much in the balance, but certainly the death toll is a frightening number, and it certainly isn't good for Trump politically, obviously.